legendary architect and designer Frank Gehry passed away Friday at the age of 96. Jim Shedden, you got to meet and work with him. I'm very interested in this and your memories of Frank, and I'm going to listen closely as you remember the late, great Frank Gehry. Tell me about this.
Yeah, it was a real honor, and I kind of knew it at the time, but as time goes by, it becomes even clearer. Like, I was aware that he was, perhaps the greatest living architect. But again, as time went on and his accomplishments, built, that became clearer and clearer. And then that kind of, even though wasn't playing like a major role with him or anything, I was just it was over many years. I was exposed to him and his studio, their working practice, and so on. And it seems like a privilege looking back. Um, and I learned a lot too because I was working at a company called Bruce Mao Design. And when I started working there in 1998, they were well underway with a work on the Walt Disney Concert Hall, which is one of the undisputed kind of masterpieces of Frank Gehry. But it seemed like it was never going to get done. We were doing signage for a parking garage, and it just seemed like the actual project wasn't going to get built. But it did, and when it did, it kind of blew people away. And then we were also working at that time on a project that didn't get built, which was the Schmidt Museum of Coca-Cola Memorabilia in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. That was for the these bottlers who had the largest collection of Coca-Cola memorabilia in the world. And it was a super cool project, but for whatever reason, they decided not to pursue it. And then as time went on, shortly after that, actually, suddenly we found ourselves working on a whole pile of Gehry projects. They were just, some of which, came to pass and some of which did not. But, I'm talking to you from one of them right now, the Art Gallery of Ontario renovation, which, it's funny. Before I went to Bruce Mao, I was working at the AGO, and then I was at Bruce Mao working on the AGO, and then I came back to the AGO. So kind of I saw it. But when we were there, we worked for both the architect and the client and the donor, and we saw all kinds of aspects of that project. These things are Architecture is very complicated,
Well,
as you can imagine.
I have questions, Jim, as you can imagine. So, firstly, you worked at Bruce Mao Design. Like, is this a whole part of your life we didn't dive deep into during your previous Toronto Mike episodes?
I think that might be true. Yeah, I worked there for 12 years from 1998 to 2010. It
But
was a
but you're
real
not an architect.
No, I'm not an architect or a designer, but I was a client when I was at the AGO, and I got to know them in that world, and uh, they're pretty multifaceted, and they were looking for, you know, there was room for someone like me there, just someone who was curious and engaged and could get shit done. But I have to say, working in a place like that and working on projects like this, the imposter syndrome it can be pretty strong. So sometimes I'll look back and I think, well, I managed, a lot got done, and then other times I just think, what the fuck were they thinking in hiring me? But
Well, welcome to my world, imposter syndrome. It's like, oh, wait a minute. I think they got the wrong number here, but apparently they're looking for me. But so what exactly? So you ended up at Bruce Mao Design. You're there for 12 years, it looks
yeah.
like. And I guess if we go back before that, maybe tell me, how did you first become aware of Frank Gehry?
Um, yeah, just when the power plant art gallery opened down at Harborfront Center, I'm pretty sure one of the first shows, if not there were two shows that opened it. One was on Toronto, and one was a traveling show from the Walker Arts Center and Frank Gehry. And so I went to see that, and was just beginning to think about architecture. And funnily enough, it was part of that was from these zone publications that Bruce had started working on.
Oh,
The first thing he ever did was something called Zone 1-2, the Contemporary City. The first thing he did as a solo designer, and that's where I really that came out in 1985, and that's where I first got some sense of contemporary architecture. And in the mid 80s, I part of me thinks that the 80s were the worst period of architecture in the history of the world. Um, and I can point to a lot of examples. But it was also an exciting time for architects who were working against that. I mean, I think there was like a tabula rasa, and in a way, there was no one who demonstrated that more than Frank Gehry. Like he didn't, there were a lot of things he didn't have to contend with. He didn't. Um, Modernism was done and it was great, and he learned a lot from it, but there was no point in continuing to be Mies van der Rohe or Frank Lloyd Wright or Le Corbusier. That's on the one hand, and then there were some early ideas of what postmodernism might be, but a lot of that was just about uh, kitsch and ornamentation and all that. But with Frank, it was about you know a lot of things. But one thing was about liberating materials to create new architectural forms that were more in line with sculpture, but also were great buildings. They were not just, there were lots of architects who created, buildings that were primarily sculptural, but failures as actual functional buildings.
right.
But the Walt Disney Concert Hall is a great concert hall. It sounds great. It's a great place to visit. It has a beautiful effect on the city. I haven't actually been to Bilbao and Guggenheim, his most famous building, but
Right.
um, the effect it had on the city was monumental. So he was able to kind of bring all those things together at the same time. And then he embraced to do all of this. He embraced computer software that was not being used on the whole in the architectural field at the time. One of them being CATIA, which was like a database software that was used in the aerospace industry, and it allowed for more precise engineering of materials and forms, and it was pretty. I mean, I was kind of blown away. This stuff was like totally beyond me, and when you see it in action, you're like, I really hope they know what they're doing. It's.
I'm surprised to learn something might be beyond you. Like, this is encouraging to me.
Well, I mean, uh,
You're quite the Renaissance man, all over the place. Now, okay, so let me just bring it back to, well, you mentioned Frank Lloyd Wright. I think if you said to me, Mike, name all the architects you can, okay? And I should preface this by saying, recently I've started producing a show for a gentleman named Nick Iones, and it's called Building Toronto Skyline. And we've had a few architects on that podcast, and Nick was trained as an architect. Now he does, building development with Fusion Corp. But I have met some architects, and it's always fascinating to hear from them. But if you said to me, name some architects, so you mentioned Frank Lloyd Wright. That's a name I know from The Simpsons. Okay, so he was name checked in a song Apu sings on The Simpsons. But I'm going to play, if you don't mind, for 90 seconds, I'm going to play some Frank Gehry on The Simpsons. I'm pretty sure Frank Gehry is the only architect that ever got a cameo on The Simpsons. So let's just listen to this. 82 seconds. Here we go.
Great! We asked Frank Gehry to build us a concert hall.
Bill, Bilbow Bill. Snoopy Stationery.
Dear Mr. Gehry, would you please build a concert hall for our town? We may not be the biggest city or the prettiest, but we were the first city in America to abandon the metric system.
Frank Gehry, you're a genius. Behold, the new Springfield Concert Hall. And none of this would have happened if not for a letter I received from one little girl.
I wrote that letter.
You wrote I was the bestest architect in the world?
Well, aren't you?
All in favor of building a $30 million screw you to Shelbyville?
Aye!
Get off my masterpiece, you punks. I'll call your mothers.
Yo, Frank Gehry, like curvy linear forms much?
That's how famous Frank Gehry was, you know?
Yeah,
Like
that's great.
that's a big deal, right?
Yep, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, the next most famous architect is someone else that we worked with as well, Rem Koolhaas, but he's nowhere near as famous. So it's like it really is all about Gehry, and that's partly because of those signature forms. Like, Frank is something, but there's, some people, if they saw Bilbao or the Walt Disney Concert Hall, they'd be able to say, "Oh, that's Frank Gehry," Um, and then he carried that over into furniture and jewelry and all kinds of other things that were also all about liberating form and materials.
Is it safe to say he was the first Starchitect?
That's my feeling, although they was sort of all happening at once. I feel that Bilbao was was the beginning. That was 1997. But then around that same time, you had Liebeskind's Jewish Museum. I say Jewish Museum. Do I mean Holocaust Museum? Anyways, in Berlin, and that was a kind of ooh ah moment as well, and really is only, by some people's opinion, the only successful building he really built. But you started to see things in the late 90s and in the early millennium, and everyone kind of chasing that in the cultural sphere, as they still do. There's still lots of, multi hundreds of $1 million projects. Although things are getting more realistic, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think he kind of, and there's it working on these projects, you can kind of see just the transformative effect they could have. So one project we worked on was the Panama Museum of Biodiversity, and it wasn't one of his bigger projects in a way, but we developed at Bruce Mount Design, we developed the exhibition strategy for it, and it has played a huge effect on transforming the Panama economy and the tourism there and so on. So that's one that doesn't even come up in conversation a lot. But whereas others are more, I don't actually love all of the buildings, but I like, there's but I love most of them that I've seen, I've been to lots of them. And when I'm there in person, it's always, I'm usually in awe. But there's one building he built near the High Line in New York, and we worked on it for the IAC headquarters for Barry Diller. And it's like this white glass building, that was originally going to be titanium. And we designed what was at the time the largest, um, you know, t what can I say? TV display. I'm using the wrong
Okay.
words here.
It's
It
okay.
was, in New York, you can only have, exuberant signage in Times Square. So once you're outside of Times Square, you can't really have anything. But this was inside, and you could see it from outside the building, and it was kind of a daring move in a way. But to be honest, I've never loved that building. It just reeks of money and arrogance to me. And it may be because I met Barry Diller many times, and he just kind of struck me as that. And I think it could have been a better building. Um, but that's like maybe that's the only one that I don't like.
Well, okay, so Frank Gehry, born here in Toronto,
Yep.
but there aren't a lot of. So I know that there's this Mervish Gehry. It's a two tower mixed use building complex called Forma that where the towers were designed by Frank Gehry. So, but other than that, and the fact you pointed out, you actually work at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and of course, the new facade there was Frank Gehry. But is there anything else in Toronto that we can point to that was Frank Gehry?
So more than the facade, by the
Oh
way,
yeah, well tell me, because
in the AGO was something called transformation, and it was a total renovation of the galleries and um, new galleries for European art and the ship model galleries, and then the rear facade of titanium blue, and then the front facade that looks like a hockey visor. There's a beautiful galleria inside, and beautiful galleries for the Thompson Canadian Collection and all that. So there's actually a lot more to it, and then also the winding staircases that were kind of are in Walker Court now and on the exterior of the building and the so it was a big project. But other than that, and then there are these big projects with Mervish. Forma is one of them, but I believe and that one is actually under construction.
yeah,
And that's going to be like an 84-story tower and a 74-story tower. But I think there's going to be, in theory, we'll see how it goes, but
mm-hmm.
at least one more tower on King Street, maybe two. I could be wrong. That are mixed use, residential hotel, etc. Forma would also include facilities for OCAD and the art school and Mervish's art collection. But other than that, in Toronto, no. The closest uh, there's a winery in Niagara,
Okay.
a modest project. Um, and then there were a number of people trying to do projects with him that ranged from Holy Blossom Temple to I think I probably signed non-disclosure agreements with these things, so but whatever.
You've
Here
already
we are.
said too much, Mr. Shedden.
So Holy Blossom Temple, Bathurst, JCC. Um, I can't even remember them all now, but there were a number of Toronto and Maple Leaf Gardens. Actually, there was a period before it became the Loblaws Mattamy. There was a sense of what should we do here, and Frank had some interesting ideas to what to be done, although his involved demolishing it because he
Oh,
felt that it was limited what you could do with a building like that, and besides make it a hockey rink. And his idea was to make it Maple Leaf garden down below, and then build like a canopy above it, and so there would be a park and some kind of use of building above.
well,
Um,
well I'm gonna guess. You know, destroying the facade of that building is a non-starter. I'm sure that's a historical
It was a
site.
non-starter. I mean, he talked about it, when he was working on the AGO too. He said, for the money you have and for what you want to do, it would be a lot easier if we could just, bulldoze the building. But you're not going to do that. So we have to think about this in a creative way. And I'm glad that they didn't, because there's some important historical, this is a conglomeration of buildings here. So, but yeah, there were other projects in Toronto that everyone wanted. Everyone wanted some of the pixie dust at that
Right.
time. Frank,
Well,
yeah,
once he was on The Simpsons, it was like, we got to get a Frank Gehry here. Let's
yeah,
go.
exactly, yeah.
That's how you
Um,
reach dummies like me, right? You got
I
to
mean,
get on The Simpsons.
yeah, he just it was incredibly productive though. It it was he had quite a machine. Like there were I think a few hundred people working for him, and in this you know pretty cool studio in Playa del Rey. It seemed like in the middle of nowhere in California, and he would literally do what you imagined. He would say, he'd have some paper and just say, well, I'm thinking of something like this, and then people go, okay, I kind of get that, and then there'd be people grabbing that right away, photographing it and drawing it, and making 3D models of it and so on, and coming back to him, and he'd say, no, 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 I meant to be more like that, and
Interesting.
it was incredible to watch the process. And to watch this team of people who knew how to respond and turn these things into reality. And that's early days before you go into, all the drawings and the engineering. And he also had great engineers that he worked with, because obviously he had to have great engineers to do the things that they pulled off.
Okay, so you just mentioned you've been to Playa del Rey. I'm assuming multiple times. So could you tell me anything about actually, your time spent with Frank Gehry? So obviously you worked with him and everything, but what about the man himself? Did you have any time with him?
Yeah, and he would come to our studio in Toronto as well. I mean, he was a little gruff, but pleasant enough. Never. I mean, I think I saw him get angry, but um, I it wasn't angry the way Rem Koolhaas could be angry, like throwing things at you and having a meltdown.
Well, that's good.
Frank was good, but yeah, I mean, it was somewhat intimidating. Again, as someone, there. I was often there representing the studio, and Bruce wasn't always there, so it was just, sometimes it was just our team. And although I, in some ways, was the least skilled person there, I was in some ways trying to be the most adult person there, trying to like listen to things and guide our team, and just answer the clue phone, and but I'd never been to LA before and so for the first many trips we had other clients in LA, but for the first few times it was just the Gary office, and we'd fly down and go to the Marriott Hotel in Marina Del Rey, and go to the Cheesecake Factory at the base, and at the base of the building, and there was, we didn't have a car or anything, so we could walk to like a little Mexican place. And then I just thought and also this is kind of pre Google Maps, right? For the most part, certainly not on your phone. So I don't really know the geography. And get up in the morning and take a cab to the studio. They'd bring in lunch, always from Panera Bread, before it was in Canada. So it was kind of novel. And then it was in Canada and it flopped. So, um, and then, maybe Frank would take us out to a steakhouse in Santa Monica where he lived. Or we'd go back to the hotel and go to the Cheesecake Factory, but, or visit someone else we knew. But yeah, eventually one day I realized that we were just, where we were was right near Venice Beach, and I could have just kind of wandered at night down to the beach.
Wow.
But yeah, it was it was good. There were a lot of really brilliant people there. Uh, that as I said, I learned a lot from them, and forgot how much I learned from them till I heard that Frank died, and then I was like, oh yeah, there was
Yeah.
George Metzger and Craig Webb and all these people who were incredible, and some of them probably still work there, and some of them moved on. But
Well, so you obviously, when you were working with Bruce, you were working with Frank there for what? That's 12 years, and then you mentioned you've been spending the last 15 years working in like a major Frank Gehry building at the Art Gallery of Ontario. Do you remember your final project with Frank?
mm. Yeah, it didn't go well. It was big. There were some big projects that didn't go well for one reason or another. The one of the final ones before the final one was we were working on kind of reimagining Saks Fifth Avenue, and it was kind of funny because they didn't want to you know th- they had big ideas about what working with Frank Gehry would be, but they didn't really want to pay his bill and the bill to actually do what he was proposing, and retail just kind of works like this. You kind of put it up, you get it, you take it down, right? And I remember getting a text or an email from one of the partners there who said to me, when I can't afford to shop at Saks, I go to Target. In other words, they can't afford Gary. So so that didn't work out, and it was disappointing because I found it kind of interesting. But then the very last project was it was like a competition for a aquarium in Sentosa Island off of Singapore for this developer Saul Kurtzner, who had done I don't know, one of those big ones in Barbados or Bahamas or whatever. And really, none of us on the team were into it. I mean, it's not that we weren't into the aquarium, but the idea of we weren't into casinos, right?
Oh,
And that's what it was. Like, is in an aquarium as an alibi for producing a casino, where billions of dollars could be made. So we tried to get earnestly into the whole aquarium side and what we could do with it and all that. Um, and we went to see some cool aquariums like um, um, in California and all that, but this was not that kind of aquarium. This was going to be, anyways. Frank wasn't really into it, to be quite honest, and he basically he said, "I'll do it as long as your team and Greg Lynn's team. Greg's a cool architect in Los Angeles. If you guys do the heavy lifting." And Bruce was not focused on it. I don't know have any other way to put it. And I think that the rest of our team were not really we just weren't coming up with the stuff, and it wasn't good enough. And we weren't really it wasn't really our language. And but there was a lot of money on the table, and Frank was Frank was angry at us. So
oh.
that was the end.
Well, that was it. So you leave Bruce Mau Design in 2010, and that's even though that feels to me like it was a couple of years ago, apparently I'm told that's 15 years ago. So over the past 15 years, obviously you mentioned what Frank did, that building that you work in, the work there, that's major work from Frank Gehry. But would you, from periodically would you see something that would make you think of Frank? I mean, this was the Starchitect that you were around for, 12 years. Like, what were your thoughts of Frank the past 15 years?
In our building, you mean?
Like, just in Jim Shedden's head, in Jim Shedden's heart. Like, I'm just curious because you just learned, of course, on Friday, you learned Frank Gehry passed away, lived to be 96 years old. That's a pretty good run there. But I'm just wondering the last 15 years when Frank
Yeah.
Gehry would enter your mind or your heart.
Yeah, a few years ago, I went to LA with my family, including my mother-in-law, and I made everyone go to the Walt Disney Concert Hall. We didn't see anything, but I just said, you got to come walk around it. Like, you're not, like, trust me, you have to go see it. And so that was exciting, and hadn't been there for a number of years. Um, so it, you know, yeah, he's in a way always on my mind. I was in Spain a few years ago, and um, Barcelona, and there's this, Olympic pavilion and this fish sculpture that he did. I don't know when, but fairly early on, and it's I should know if I knew my Olympics, I would know. For the Barcelona Olympics, it was very cool, and I wasn't really. It's funny because I knew he did it, but then I wasn't looking for it, and then we just were walking along the beach, and it's like, oh, there's this Frank Gehry, and it was really super cool. And then I realized we could have gone to Bilbao, but it was a 6-hour train ride, and we weren't there long enough. We'll do that another day. But and then other times too, same thing. Just being in Minneapolis for work, just meeting people at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and there's a museum that he designed there, and a great some great buildings that again they've been by surprise. I've
Huh.
just kind of stumbled on them, and then you never there's no never it's like seeing a Klaus Oldenburg sculpture. You kind of go, well, that's a badminton birdie. Like this, it could only be Klaus Oldenburg. They were close, by the way. They kind of
Oh.
he had good relationships with a lot of major artists, and so like Richard Serra and Oldenburg and many others. But so there was a lot of cross pollination. So
By the way,
yeah,
the Barcelona Summer Olympics were 1992.
yeah. Uh,
It's the sandwich. People forget it because Seoul, you remember, because it was 88, and that's when Ben Johnson got stripped of his world record. And then 96, you remember, because Donovan Bailey wins in Atlanta. So, but in 92, that was the Barcelona one.
right, right. Well, if you're ever there, it's really cool. And also, Barcelona's just really a super cool city. Anyway,
Well, speaking of cool cities, have you ever been to the Louis Vuitton Foundation in Paris?
I have not. And that's one of his major buildings for sure. So I'd like to go there. Yeah, there's some things I've not. I mean, there are many that I haven't seen. That would be great to do that.
Well, this was great. Like, I'm just glad we could connect and chat for a half an hour about the late great Frank Gehry, and you are the perfect FOTM for this job because I didn't even know about those 12 years working at the Bruce Mao. That's great perspective you bring to this whole thing. So thank you for doing this with me.
Well, thank you for having me. I have to say, it was nice to be able to do this on Zoom. However, um, you don't get lasagna this way. So, Palma's lasagna. Just
Speaking of Palma, I was going to my thought was, okay, you're remembering somebody who passed away Friday. Let's keep the ads off this and just do it. But I will say it was great to see you at Palma's Kitchen just, what was that, like 10 days ago or whatever at TMLX
yeah,
21. I love seeing you there.
yeah, that was great. Yeah, it was a very it was unbelievable how many people were there, and the energy, and the I don't know what you're gonna do. You're gonna have to move it to um
Scotiabank Arena.
Scotiabank Arena. Yeah.
I just want you to know, though, I'm just as excited, maybe more so, to see Jim Shedden in the crowd than I am to see Carla Collins. I want you to know that.
Yeah. Yeah. That was good. Well, there are other exciting people there too. So,
Well, it's funny because when you described Frank Gehry, you used these words. I took a note. You said, a little gruff, but pleasant enough. And I thought you were talking about our friend Alan Zweig for a moment.
well, Frank wasn't, I mean, Alan's more of that's more of his brand in a way,
Right.
like I think,
I curmudgeon.
yeah, I think Frank wasn't quite as, I don't know. It's not as profoundly curmudgeonly. But the thing is, if you're a creative person like Alan or like Frank, then you're not really a curmudgeon, right? Like I think if you make things, you still have faith. You still believe there's value in doing those things, and so you might have this, exterior,
Right.
but at the end of the day, what are you doing? You're making movies, you're making buildings, you really believe there's value in creativity. So
This is the great paradox.
yeah, so yeah,
So wise, such sage information from Jim Shedden. So, Jim, we do at some point your next appearance. You've got to be in this basement, man. I'll hook you up with the beer. I'll hook you up from Great Lakes. I'll hook you up with the pasta. We'll do it right. But thanks for jumping on Zoom talking about Frank Gehry with me.
all right, it was a pleasure. Okay, thank you.